Here we go. All right. Oh, good morning, everyone. Still coming in. Okay. So yes, as I said, we're going to start with just finishing off William the First, William the Conqueror, and yeah, we're going to talk about a little bit about how he gained control of England, what kind of a king he was, and how he dies as well. Okay. So, if you remember, last time William had won the Battle of Hastings, which means he defeated Harold Godwinson and become not quite King of England. He then goes along and he starts. After he wins the battle, he has to become officially the king. So basically what he does is, through a combination of scaring everyone around him by being particularly violent and vicious, and having a good tactical brain in his head, he manages to be crowned King of England on Christmas Day 1066. Now, he's probably not the nicest king we've ever had. Hello. Where's the... Yes, I suppose Queen Elizabeth is part French. Yes, Queen Elizabeth, our current queen, can trace her family tree all the way back to William I. Not quite Harold Godwinson, unfortunately. Yeah, Harold II. He's not related, but there's a lot of mixing that goes on in there. So yeah. Now, if you do have, if you look in the Google Drive, some people are asking about the sheet. If you have a look in the Google Drive, you'll see that there's a sheet there which you can fill in for each king and queen if you want to, including a 5-star rating at the bottom, so you can decide, where these kings and queens fit on your radar. And so if you haven't got that right now, you can download it, print it off after the lesson. But it's there on the Google Drive, and I believe you can find the Google Drive link through Facebook in some way. My wife, she makes all the Facebook stuff work. I just talk about kings, so there you go. So how does he manage to gain control? And you gave him 2 stars, Eleanor. Oh yeah, I think that's generous, to be honest. I don't like this guy at all. He manages to gain control of England through a few different methods, one of those being his castles. Now, William is a castle pioneer. When he comes to England, there are no castles in England. We've got the odd Roman fort, so big wooden forts that the Romans had built hundreds and hundreds of years before and have now left behind. Now, then we've also got, we also had some walls around some of our cities. So like London would have had walls around it, Canterbury would have had walls around it, probably wooden walls, and nothing like the castles that William would bring. Now, William doesn't just know, he didn't invent the castles, William. They're quite popular in Europe already. They're being used across Germany and France and places like that. So William's bringing the idea to England. He's not coming up with the idea. But at first he builds wooden motte and bailey castles. Now, a motte and bailey castle, I'll find you a very simple diagram here. It's basically a castle with a wall and a hill. Yeah, that's the motte and the bailey. If I can bring up a nice little diagram here. 5 stars from James. Very nice. So here's our motte and bailey castle. If I can get it to be where I want it to be. So a motte and bailey, in its simplest form, looks like this. We've got the hill, which is the motte, and that was usually made artificially. So it would take a lot of peasants a long time to take soil and earth from the surrounding area and heap it all up into this really precise sort of dome shape with a flat top. I'm not sure what that flat-topped dome, that's probably got a proper name, but yeah, we'll go for motte. And then we've got a walled-off area around it, which is called the bailey, and that's where all the action happens and life is led. So here in this particular picture, we've got the barracks for the soldiers and the knights. We've got the stables for the horses. We'd have small areas for farming. We've got the well here to make sure that there's a water supply in times of need. And up on the Mott, though, we have the most important part of the castle, the part where you keep your treasure, your king, your princesses safe, and that's called the keep. Okay. So at first, William just starts planting these castles all over England because castles are amazing. If you have a castle, you both have physical control and symbolic control over the people around you. So to unpack that a little bit, physical control is all about having soldiers who are there ready to launch out of the castle to attack people who are annoying them. So either rebellions from the English, of which there were a lot, or invasions from other groups. So although if we have a quick look at our map of Norman England here, at first William only takes over this part, then he conquers this part and this part, but he never conquers Wales and he never conquers Scotland. So they're constantly invading, as well as the Vikings, the Norwegians, the Danes. They keep coming from the east as well. So he's got to make sure that his people are safe from all these different invaders. So on a physical way, these castles keep him super safe. They can also keep the people safe, because if, say that the Vikings or the Welsh, they are raiding and they're coming towards your towns and villages, then the people can just pick up all their stuff, run into the castle behind the walls and stay there and hide there for as long as they need to until the threat has been dealt with. So, that gives you physical control over an area. But William likes his mind games, and castles, they give you psychological control, let's put it that way. If you imagine you're an English peasant and you wake up every day and you look outside and the first thing you see is this massive, great big Norman castle on the hill over your house, you're going to know deep down in your bones and your soul that you are owned by the Normans. So it plays on your mind. It means that you're not going to try and rebel, because it just shows such power from your Norman overlords that you're never going to mess with them. So these castles are working in two really important ways. Now, most of England, they kind of succumb to William a little bit. There's rumblings down in Exeter. The people of Exeter, they rebel a couple of times, but eventually they get given up after they keep getting kicked by William and his Normans. The Welsh invade, the Scottish invade. But the real place that William has to stamp down on more than any other is the north of England, York and northwards. Armani, I don't believe his mum was a slave. She was just a normal peasant woman, the daughter of a leather worker. So not quite a slave, but not posh either. No, not a posh lady. And yes, Laura, the Normans were originally Vikings. The Vikings had settled in Normandy, hence the name Normans, because they are the Northmen. North, kind of makes sense. Here we go. So, how old is he? I don't know how old he is now. I think when he dies, he's about 54-ish, I seem to remember. You might need to fact check me on that one. Somewhere in his 50s, I believe. Now, the people of the North, they hate him, totally hate him, because they don't want to live under, well, what we would call today French, but what they would call Norman rule. He makes some really harsh laws. Julia, you'll see why I'm in a forest in a bit. It all makes sense. Yeah, and forests are nice. So, yeah. So the people of the North, they particularly dislike William, and they particularly dislike him because he sends up he divides the country up, and all these castles, they get given their Norman lords who lorded over the place, push people around. William makes harsh laws. First of all, he takes all the forests in England and he says that they are his forests and no one else is allowed in them. And if you go in there and you kill a bird and to eat it, or you pick some mushrooms, or you take some firewood, or you hunt a deer, then it counts as stealing directly from the king, which means it is punishable by death. So the peasants of England can no longer go into their forests and their wild places. They're all shut off, so they don't like him for that. He then makes, brilliant, 59 when he died. Thank you very much, Bilal. And then it gets worse, because he makes laws that say that you cannot leave your village without permission of your lord, which sometimes the lord just won't give. You cannot get married without the permission of your lord, and usually the lord will charge you to get married. Yeah, he'd make you pay money to get married. So William is trying to tighten up his control over the peasants of England. It would not have been nice to be a standard peasant living at this time, because William, he hates you. Yeah, he's the first in a long line of French-speaking kings who cannot really stand the English. In fact, as soon as William has a vestige of control over England, he goes back to Normandy, because he much prefers it there. The food is better, the weather's better. He doesn't have to listen to all those annoying English people talking in their stupid English voices. Yeah, he's not a fan of the place, but he does like England's money for sure. That's a good way of putting it. The Lord controls everyone's life. Yeah, anything you want to do, you've got to pass it by the Lord first. And if it's a nice Lord, then great. But if it's a bad Lord, then he's going to take money from you, or do horrible things to you. So the people of the north, they rebel. They refuse to live under William's rule. But then William gets angry. Now, William's a bit of a dangerous guy. I think I mentioned this last time. He's not a nice man. And at first he sends an army up, quite a big army, to the north to try and fight the Northerners and defeat them. But he finds that hard, because the Northerners, it's very hilly up in the north of England, and they can just hide in the rocks and up in the mountains and in the forests, and he can never quite get hold of them. He can't catch them to pin them down to make them do what he wants. So William comes up with another idea. And he sends his soldiers, instead of out to fight the Northerners, he sends them all across the north, and he gives them very strict orders to burn down every house that he can find, set fire to every field that he can find, kill every single animal, every sheep, every pig, every goat, every cow, kill the lot, and then take their bodies and throw them in the wells to poison the water supply. And so in this way, he doesn't just destroy the people of the north. He doesn't kill them all directly, but he leads to a massive famine, which means that as winter comes in, no one's got anywhere to stay safe, because there's no homes anymore. No one's got anything to eat, because all the animals and all the crops have gone. And eventually, after many of the Northerners die of starvation, William, on Christmas Day, he goes to York, and he puts himself on, as the people of the north are starving around him, he puts himself on a massive Christmas dinner. And he sits there in York, and he eats more food than any person could possibly ever manage. He just stuffs his face, and then he puts on his crown, and he walks around the city with his crown on, just to tell everyone that he's in charge. And of course, everything does happen on Christmas Day. He was a fan of Christmas, was William. He likes to make his point on Christmas Day. Yes. So the people of the north, they got the message, and eventually they had to give in, because William is just so horrible. But to put on top of that, to go even further, William then uses the most deadly enemy against people. Oh yes, he writes himself, or at least he gets his friends to write for him. He couldn't read and write himself, he was a king, he was too busy eating. He gets his friends to write for him the Doomsday Book. Boom, boom, boom. Yes, he pulls out the ultimate weapon, mathematics. He sends his monks and his knights around the country to count everything and everyone, and he writes all the numbers down in a great big book. Yes, dun, dun, dun. He does this because he wants complete control. He needs to know exactly how many people there are in every village. And so what he will do is he'll send people around. He'll count all the people. He'll count their farming equipment. He'll count their animals. He'll count how much forest they have, or that they're allowed to have. And then he would count that in numbers of possible pigs that could live in the forest. So he would count forestry and pigs, which is a weird idea, but it seemed to work. And once he'd counted everything, then he knew exactly how much money he could safely take from all the people. So he could take the maximum amount of money from people, because he knew who was living where. And of course, when people aren't allowed to move around, he's got a really good solid idea. And so the Doomsday Book, his big book of numbers, basically, of just counting, leads him to be able to take more and more money from the English people and really make sure that they're poor and cannot fight him back. So he's a very clever but not a very nice guy, for sure. Now, he does end in a suitably gruesome way for a suitably gruesome man, I think. Yeah, I've written down here that he has quite an explosive exit. Because William, when he is, as we now know, thank you, 59 years old, he's down back in Normandy fighting battles against rebel French forces. Oh, well, Julia, the idea is that he knows exactly how much money you have because he's counted everything. So he knows exactly how much money to take from you. Yeah. Julia asked, what if they didn't have enough money to pay? And that's the point of the Doomsday Book. It makes sure that he knows exactly how much money you have, so you cannot get away with it. If before, someone might have come to your village and said, right, you guys, you owe us £10 in taxes. And the people would have said, oh, my lord, we can't possibly do that. No, oh, we don't have that much money. I don't know why they're Irish all of a sudden. Maybe there was an Irish peasant on holiday. And William would say, okay, fair enough. Yeah, you seem poor. You're all dirty and grubby and peasant-like, so fair enough. But now he's got his book. He can come to that village and the guys can say, oh, we don't have enough money. And he'll go, yes, you do. It says it in my book. And then he'll lift the poor little Irish peasant upside down and take his money out. Again, there were no Irish people. I don't know why I chose that accent. Whatever. So, how he dies. William is down in Normandy riding around on a great big war horse, and he's galloping around when all of a sudden his horse rears up or bolts or maybe just suddenly stops, and the horse stops moving. He keeps moving. He goes right up in the air, and then he sits down hard on the pommel of his saddle. Now, I'll just show you, for those of you who are not sure, what a pommel looks like. Find you a picture here. Oh, here we go. It's a nice, friendly, helpful diagram from Google. Here we are. So the pommel is this part here. Yeah, so he sits down right on this lumpy, bumpy part, right on his rear end. Ouch. Now, this means that, well, he's in excruciating pain. It doesn't directly kill him. He takes a few weeks to die, unfortunately for him, but it ruptures all of his stuff inside, and so he starts to get all moldy, and he starts to swell up. He was already getting pretty fat, but he starts to swell up inside, and as he's lying there dying, they ask him, William, are you ready to pass your kingdom over to your son? Now, William's oldest son is called Robert, and according to the law of the time, what you should do is give your kingdom to the oldest son. But there is a problem. William hates his oldest son, Robert. In fact, he says that Robert is too stupid and too silly to ever take control. So he says, no, I will not give my lands to Robert. No, no, no. He doesn't want to break the rules completely, though. So what he does is he divides his kingdom into two, there on his deathbed. And this is going to lead to years of trouble. But what he does is he says, okay, Robert, he can have the Normandy. That is my traditional homeland. He can have that. And then he says, my second son, William, he can have England. Let him do what he wants with it. It'll be great. My stomach, it really hurts. That's probably what he said. Now, after a small time, William dies. The people of England aren't particularly sad. I'm going to tell you that. Not even his own children are particularly sad. I'm sure his wife is quite relieved. I mean, he forced her to marry him in the first place. So, he's not a very popular guy. When it comes to burying him in Caen in northern France, we can just about see that if I can zoom in on the map. Here is where he's buried, at Caen. When they go to bury him, he's too fat to fit in the coffin because he's swelled up from this horrible death that he had. Plus, he was quite a fat lad anyway by the end of it. So they can't quite fit him in the coffin. When they try and squeeze him into the coffin, he explodes in a disgusting shower of grossness. And so everything stinks. The church is is filled with this horrible stench. Nobody wants to stay around. Lightning strikes the town of Caen and sets some buildings on fire during his funeral. Somebody stands up from the crowd just before he's getting buried and starts shouting at his coffin and demanding more justice because William had taken money from him. So his followers had to take this man away and give him money to make him shut up. The whole thing was just a mess. Yeah, he did not have a very nice funeral. He went down in a explosive ball of yuck with lightning striking and angry peasants shouting at him. So, maybe he deserved that. Oh, poor man, says Elizabeth. Oh. I don't think he got as fat as Henry VIII, although I'm not entirely sure. Oh, it was disgusting. It was disgusting, yes. But I feel no sympathy for William. He's one of my least favourite. If it was me, I'd give him 1 star. Ooh. But let's see if his son does a better job. So here's William II, also known as Rufus, William Rufus. He is known as Rufus for a couple of reasons. One, because I suppose just calling him King William gets confusing because his dad was called William. So there you go. But also Rufus means red. And as you can see in this representation of him here, he has bright red hair. That's the idea. That's it, Laura. Yeah, his hair is red, so he's called Rufus for red. Yeah, William the Red. Now, this guy then, he's the second son of William the Conqueror, not the first son. And I think it's fair to say he wasn't his dad's favourite son. I mean, his dad didn't like any of his sons, to be fair, it doesn't seem. Possibly the next one to come along, but maybe not. And to be honest, William is different. William is going to have a couple of problems throughout his reign. He's not oh dear. He's not going to be a popular king. Some people will like him, but in my opinion, William never really takes the job too seriously. And his main problem is that he has no respect at all for religion. Yeah, he doesn't like the Catholic Church, which is the only church in town. There are no other options at this time in history, not in this part of the world anyway. So he's not a fan of the Pope. He's not a fan of the church leaders. Now, at this time, since the time of William I, William I had made the Archbishop of Canterbury the most important religious leader in the country. Before William came, it was an equal split between the Archbishop of York and of Canterbury, but for various political reasons, William took that power from York and gave it all to Canterbury, or at least a lot of it. So we're in a situation where we've got the king, William, and then you've got the second most important man in the country, the head of the religion is the Archbishop of Canterbury. And the Archbishop of Canterbury takes his orders from Rome, from the Pope, from the daddy. Yeah. Now, William does not get on with the church, with the Pope, or with the Archbishop. And there's a big reason. The big reason is that William's not quite the same as as most of the other kings because he's homosexual. He is in love with boys instead of in love with girls, which at the time in the Catholic Church is a massive crime. Yeah, it's not allowed. It's written in the Bible. This is not okay. So William, he doesn't just sort of, finally, here he comes. He doesn't put up with this. William doesn't. Yeah, he decides that it's not him that's wrong, it's the church that's wrong, which is quite a forward-thinking approach, I suppose. Nowadays, of course, most Christian churches, not all, but many Christian churches accept it far more. But, times have changed. This is nearly 2,000 years ago. So William is in a position, there you go, Julian. William's in a position where he completely breaks down. He does not like the church doesn't like him, and he's happy to accept that. William would rather spend his time making money, having fun, than doing what the church says anyway. He's not a very religious person. He basically makes the decision that if the church doesn't like him, he doesn't like the church. Yeah, that's basically where he is. Now, this does lead to problems, though. And the main one will come. Yes, yeah, that's it, Kathryn. Yes, I can see your questions there. The whole thing goes quite quickly, so if I do miss your question, you might have to ask it again, sorry. Because, you can't see it, but everyone's putting their questions in the chat. So, yeah, that is how it works, Kathryn. Yeah, fire away. So he decides that when the archbishop dies, a man called Lanfranc, he's the current archbishop, William decides that he could make a new archbishop. Okay. Um, oh, it is being recorded, Ibrahim. Yeah, this is being recorded, so you can watch it back later. Instead of making a new archbishop and then letting the archbishop have Canterbury and all the money and all the land that goes with that, he decides to just not have an archbishop. Let's just not have one. I don't like them anyway. And as a bonus, I can take control of the cathedral and I can take control of all the land around it, and it will make me really rich, reckons William. He's quite happy to do that. So for 7 long years, there is no archbishop. We'll come to St. Anselm now. Now, this makes him very unpopular. No, that's a good question. He does not get to marry a boy. No, he has a wife. He doesn't really want a wife, but he has one because he's got to follow the rules as a king. It seems that he had boyfriends, but it's hard to, when it comes to this far back in history, especially with things like that, which wouldn't be openly recorded. We have to make some inferences. We have to assume. He certainly has spent more time with men than he did with women, but we don't know. There was no official marriage or anything like that back then. That was wrong. Yeah, that was against the laws back then, so it wouldn't have been recorded in that way. So it seems that because he didn't have an archbishop, that's against the rules of the church, against the rules of the Pope, and so the Pope excommunicates. I'll say that word again. Excommunicates William II and the whole of England. Now, excommunication is a really harsh punishment. It's the most harsh punishment that you can have in medieval times, basically. It means that you have been shut out of the church. The church has turned its back on you. You are no longer allowed to have any of the sacraments. You're not allowed to, baptisms aren't allowed to happen. Proper funerals aren't allowed to happen. Proper weddings aren't allowed to happen for all that time. And the Pope is doing this to the whole country. Yes, that's right. Yeah, he loved boys instead of girls. Yeah, that's what it seems. During this time, the English people, they cannot practice their religion in the same way that they did. It also means that if you die whilst excommunicated, then you will go straight to hell. There is no heaven for you because the Pope has said no. There you go. So William at first doesn't care. He's not fussed about being excommunicated. He doesn't really mind. But then one day he gets terribly ill. And he's there in his bed and the doctors are around him tutting and going, oh, this doesn't look good. And he's there going, and he has a horrible thought. He realizes, that's a good question, Eleanor. Yes, all English peasants did go to church, yes. In this period, England really only had 2 religions in it. Christians who went to church and a very small number of Jewish people who did not go to church, but they had their own synagogues. We'll see with a future king that Jewish people don't get to stay for long because they will be kicked out of England. For about 1,200 years, it will be illegal to be a Jewish person in this country. And then, so there'll only be one type of Christianity during that time, yes. But by this point, Islam hasn't reached England. There's no Hinduism, there's no Taoism, there's no Sikhism. Well, Sikhism hasn't even been created yet. So yeah, we're in a time of, not even Protestant Christianity has been created yet. So most people, the vast majority of peasants, are going to church every week, every Sunday, Roman Catholic churches. Now, if the Pope dies during excommunication, that's a good question, John. The next Pope could then lift that excommunication. Now, popes themselves, if they were excommunicated, they would lose their job as Pope, in theory, because you cannot be the Pope and excommunicated at the same time. But if one Pope excommunicates you, that can be lifted by a following Pope, because the Popes, they all have equal power to each other. Okay. And some people are saying that things are freezing. If that's happening, it might just be the sheer amount of people on. I don't know. So sometimes if the screen is, or the microphone is going, if you turn your camera on and off, that sometimes works. I'll do that from my end as well, if I can. So I'll just, oh no, I can't turn my camera off right now because it's recording. Oh well, we're stuck with that. Sorry. He ruled for 13 years. There you go. Yes, he did. Yeah. He didn't start when he was 0, so he was older than 13. Now, he's there, lying on his deathbed. He believes he's going to die, and everyone around him believes that he's going to die. So he gets scared. He realizes that if he dies now, he's not going to be able to go to heaven. And that frightens him because, well, hell sounds bad. It's supposed to be bad, and he doesn't want to go there. So he says, "Bring me someone and I will make them archbishop. Oh, no, I feel very poorly." And so they bring to him one of the most important Christians at the time, a man called Anselm. That's Saint Anselm now. Now, Anselm is a super Christian. He absolutely, he follows Christianity by the letter. He does what the Pope says. He is well known for being kind and charitable to people and incredibly intelligent. And also, so the legends say, he can talk to birds and animals and they can talk to him. He's like Dr. Dolittle, yeah? How true that is, I don't know. It depends on what you believe, I guess. But that's what the legends say. After he died, Anselm became a saint, which means that he has performed miracles. Partly those miracles are talking to birds and animals, I guess. So Anselm is brought into the room, and William holds him by the hand and says, "You are now Archbishop, please forgive me." And Anselm does forgive him, but then William gets better. He doesn't die at all. Yeah, he gets quite fit again, but he's made his mistake. He's already put an archbishop in control, and so now William has to share his power once again with an archbishop. And to be honest, for William, this is not great, because I like to think of William and Anselm as like a couple in a sitcom. They're arguing constantly. Yeah, they rub each other the wrong way all the time, and they're always fighting and arguing. Anselm will be trying to do the good Christian thing. William will be trying to do the anti-Christian thing, where he, has loads of parties and takes money off people. And the two of them, they don't agree about much ever. Yeah, like siblings. That's a good way of looking at it, Laurie. Yes, siblings. That's it. So it's like a couple of brothers who are just constantly arguing. But unfortunately, William doesn't get to argue for long, because he is going to die. And he is going to die in a beautiful forest like the one behind me. Now, one day, he goes out hunting. He loves going out hunting. And on this occasion, he goes out with his best friend, Walter Tyrrell. Possibly his boyfriend, possibly not. Again, it's difficult to actually pin these things down. But he goes out hunting in the dark forest, trying to catch and hunt deer. No, he never has any children, Kathryn. That's a good question. He does have a wife, but they never have children together. Oh, Laura, yes. Now, William can only speak French. That's a good point. So for the next few weeks, all the kings that we see will only speak French. Good morning. The vast majority of kings, up until, who is it? I think the first one is Henry IV, will be the first king to learn English, after Harold Godwinson. All the kings that we're looking at, they only speak French. They refuse to learn English. They think it is a disgusting peasant language. And so even though I will talk about them as if they're talking English, they do not. No, I cannot speak French, I'm afraid. So no, I won't be able to say their words in French. But we do have to remember, and I'll try and remind you, that none of these people are speaking English. Okay, they are not English speakers. They are not fond of English culture. These are very much Normans. So more to the French side than the English side. Yeah, good question. Bonjour. So he goes out hunting in the forest with his friend Walter Tyrrell. Oh, there's a little picture of Anselm that I found down there. And this is the long and the short of it. They go out into the woods. They're trying to hunt, and William and Walter, they catch sight of a deer. They're chasing after the deer. Walter, not William. Walter pulls back his bow and shoots William by accident right through the chest, and he dies. Why do they have? Oh no, William does not have any children. No, as we'll see. That's important that he doesn't have any children. So Walter, or kills William. William has now been killed by his best friend. This seems like an awful tragedy, a terrible accident. But some people think maybe not an accident at all. Maybe this didn't just happen. Maybe this is something that was planned in advance. Ooh. Oh, sorry, Oscar. I can only go by the names that I see in the thing. If you do want to change your names, you can. There's a setting near your chat box or on your screen where you can change your screen name. But otherwise, I'll just call you by what it says in the blue because I don't know. So Walter Tyrrell is his friend, possibly his boyfriend, and it seems like it's a terrible accident, but it might not be a terrible accident because of our next king that we're going to look at today. And that's this guy here, Henry the First. Now, because Amani, I know that you are Amani. There you go. Now, this guy, Henry the First, is William II's younger brother. So William I, William the Conqueror, has 3 sons. He has a lot of daughters too, but unfortunately they don't really come into the story because at this time, you wouldn't have queens. People just tried their hardest to find men to rule. So we kind of have to ignore the women in terms of the line of kings at least. Oh, hi Mia. So what we do, we've got Robert, who's in charge of Normandy. We've got William II, Rufus, who's in charge of England. Henry is the 3rd son, the youngest son, which means he doesn't get to be in control of anything. He doesn't get to be King of Normandy or Duke of Normandy. He doesn't get to be King of England. He gets given a lot of money, so he's rich, and he has a nice castle and a nice set of land. So he's doing all right for himself, but he wants power, really. And when Walter brings back William's body, Henry acts a little bit suspiciously, yeah? Suspiciously insofar as when William comes back and he's dead, Henry's like, oh dear, my brother has been killed in a terrible accident. How shocking. That's terrible. And he seems a little bit insincere. At the same time, he's ready to put the crown on his head. It's like he's planned out the coronation ceremony already. He's ready to be made king within a few days. So a lot of people, and it's never been proven, it's one of those history mysteries, but it is very suspicious that Henry seemed not to be shocked by the death of his brother and seems to have already planned most of the stuff he needed to take over from him. So in very short order, Henry is crowned king because William had no children. Oh yes, sorry, yes, that shouldn't. Yes, my dates are 1100 to 1100. Let me see where my dates should be. Yeah, well spotted out. Let me find his dates for you. When does Henry die? 1135. That should be. Check that. Well spotted. So yes, he's ready to be king, and he takes the job on pretty well. Everyone is muted because otherwise, with all these people in there, even just the sounds of all your breathing, it would become really, really difficult. So because we've got such a huge audience today, we're going to keep it on mute, but you can, of course, ask questions in the chat. So we've got Henry here. His brother is dead, William. He becomes King of England. He's kind of the opposite of William in many ways, of Rufus. One big thing, or maybe the main big thing, is that Henry absolutely loves the church. He gets on very well with the Pope. He makes friends with the Pope. He sorts out all that excommunication nonsense. He's very respectful to Saint Anselm. The two of them get on very well. Henry seems to be a far more, a standard king, let's say. William II, he stands out because he's very different. His personality is very different. He's not necessarily a bad guy, William, but he doesn't fit in with medieval life, with Norman life. He's an outlier. Henry is very much more straight and true. But Henry is also far more ambitious. Oh, hello, Noah. He doesn't, William II was quite happy to sit around in a castle, eating nice food and partying. He didn't really want the power or care about the power as much. Yeah. Um, oh, that's good, Peter. That's good. I was hoping that people could chat to other people. Well done. So he's not satisfied with just England. If we come back to our map over here, um, what Henry wants, sorry, is not just the England that William II had, but he also wants Robert's lands. He wants Normandy back because, of course, this is the kingdom that his father, William I, had, and he wants that same amount of power too. He doesn't want the kingdom divided anymore. So, Robert, he doesn't get on with the rest. Let's just put it that way. Robert, he never liked William. William never liked him. But the two men, they never really came into contact because Robert, pretty much as soon as he became Duke of Normandy, he goes off on crusade. He goes down to the Holy Land, to the Levant, to try and fight the Muslim forces, the caliphs down there, to take control of Jerusalem. And in fact, he is successful. But that's a whole different kettle of history to have a look at there. So whilst he's away fighting for the Holy Land, causing all kinds of problems for other people, his lands, he doesn't upset William. William's busy in England. He's well away, so William doesn't have to deal with him. But he comes back when Henry's king. Henry really wants Normandy, but he doesn't really know how to get it. He's afraid of Robert because Robert, he's quite a violent guy and he wants to take over England. Yes, we'll come to the lampreys in a minute, Thea. He wants to take over, Robert wants to take over England. Henry wants to take over Normandy. So Henry comes up with this plan and he goes over to Normandy to meet his brother Robert. Now they don't get on, these two. Yeah, and that they've been fighting on one way or another all their lives, either as children or actually at some points on the battlefield. It could be a very good drama on television. This could be, yes. That's a good question, Kai. So Robin Hood will come at the time of Richard I. We're nearly at Richard I. He'll be, let me think, Henry II, Matilda. He'll be in a couple of weeks. So yeah, we're getting towards Robin Hood time, but this is still a bit early. Henry goes over to Normandy and he has a meeting with his brother Robert where they solemnly swear never to hurt each other, to leave each other alone and never interfere in each other's business, and to never attack each other. Yeah, so the idea there is that everyone is then calms down a bit. Yeah, instead of being afraid of each other, because they've now signed this peace treaty and they've basically promised that they will not attack each other, then that means that everything's going to be good. Yeah, they can just go back to ruling over their own lands. A good question there, Unicoaster. It only lasts for about 6 months, because 6 months or so after they have this great agreement, Henry invades Normandy. He brings his English army across the Channel and he smacks Robert about. Robert ends up dead. I don't believe directly by the hands of Henry I, but definitely in his wars, and Henry takes the crown of Normandy as well, bringing the two countries back together. Good question there, Kai. Where is Edgar Atheling in all this? By this time, Edgar Atheling is dead. He outlived William I, but I don't believe he outlived William II, and he spent most of his life in Scotland, out of the way, because, yeah, there you go. Good question. Harry, what work do you mean? Sorry, Harry. Let me know. Okay. That's nice, Ibrahim. Thank you. So he now has the lot. Henry has conquered Normandy and England. He's brought his father's kingdom back together, and long may it last. Obviously not till today. If you go to Normandy today, you'll realize that it is really quite French. But for this period in history, at least, he's brought that together, and now Normandy is once again part of England. Okay. I'll see if I can send that to you, Harry. There are recordings of all these lessons up on the Google Drive. So if you do want to go and look at these lessons at any time, you can look back and see what's on the screen, all that stuff. Now, Henry isn't just a bit of a conqueror. Yeah, he's not just about taking power. He's got a big. He's interested in law and order, and to be fair to him, he's quite interested in fairness. Um, and he does set up some interesting things in Britain when it comes to law. One of his big breakthroughs is he sends out traveling judges. Yeah, Normandy is still called Normandy, Rebecca. It's just part of the country of France now. So it's an area of France, whereas back then it was its own thing, I guess. It wasn't part of France, it was part of England instead. Um, oh, I see, Harry. I see. I'll see if I can work that out for next time. Yes. Yeah, sorry, I haven't done that. Yeah. So we've got he sets up judges for crimes. So before the time of Henry, what would happen is if you had a really big problem, or if you had a small problem, my neighbor stole my cow, that kind of thing, you would go to the local lord, and the local lord would decide what to do. Yeah, they would say, okay, we'll either give the cow back, or actually no, it's his cow, so chill out. If there was a big crime, though, something that was difficult and you couldn't quite tell which way it was going, you had to go to the king, and the king would decide whether you were right or wrong, which is fine if you live in London near the king, or in Normandy where the king is staying at that time. But what if you live in York or down in Exeter, and you've got a problem? You can't really travel all the way to Normandy just to see the king to try and get your problem solved. So what Henry does is he sets up these circuits of traveling judges. These judges, they move around the country from place to place, doing what we call circuits. They go around in circles through the years. And so every couple of weeks they move and they go to a different town or city. And anyone then can go to the king, or not the king, but to the judge, and the judge will be as good as the king in giving out the laws. So this means that the people of England suddenly have access to far more fair leadership and judges and law than they did. So in that case, Henry's pretty good with that. Yeah, he might not be a great guy. He might be responsible, possibly, for the death of both his brothers. But he does seem to believe in law and order, which is maybe slightly ironic, because you'd have thought that murdering your brother is a bad thing. There you go. Henry was pretty popular, Laura. That's a good question. Rebecca, there's a link to the videos. They're on my Facebook page. I don't know how to add it here. Sorry. But yeah, Laura, that's a good question. Henry was pretty popular in England relative to his dad and his brother. Now, that doesn't mean he's well loved, perhaps, but England, at least during his reign, is peaceful. The laws get better, so the crime goes down. And people are genuinely happy with his rule. I mean, still, if you're an English peasant, you're not going to be happy with your Norman overlords, the Norman rulers, really. But, I think compared to his dad, at least, he seems a bit more fair and proper. Yeah. Now, we will come to how he dies. So, Henry, he rules for 35 years. He ends up quite an old man, far older than his brother William II. But he dies in a bit of a weird way, because he dies of illness after eating lamprey pie. Hang on. There we go. And so a lamprey is this creature down here. It's like a kind of eel. They're a bit grim, because if we look at them with their mouths open, you can see their rows and rows of spiky teeth. Oh, yes, Danny, we'll talk about his sons. That's good. Thank you for reminding me. Yes, Jasper. So Henry, he eats a pie full of lampreys. It must have been a thing back then. And yes, that's right. That's right. So he dies eating these lamprey eels. They don't agree with him in some way. Maybe they're not cooked through properly. And he ends up dying of his illness in a most gross way. Which isn't very good for him, of course. Not ideal. Yes, the mouths do look like the Kraken from Pirates of the Caribbean. Yeah, they're scary-looking creatures. Now, Laura, there is a potential, of course, that he was poisoned, but we can't really prove that. That's a tricky one. The thing about him being poisoned is that there wasn't one person, except for the next king who we'll look at next week, who would have really benefited from his death. because, and thank you, Danny here, Henry did have 2 sons, and those sons should have taken over, well, the oldest son should have taken over his country. But tragically, very tragically for Henry, one day, a few years before he dies, Henry's sons decide to come over from Normandy, where they live most of the time. They decide to visit their dad in England for a bit. They get on a boat. They come across the channel, but halfway across on their crossing, there's a massive storm. Their ship sinks, and both boys die. Henry is suddenly left with no sons at all. They've both died at the same time, and he's never quite the same again, as you can imagine. He spends the rest of his life sad and moping. He's too old by that point, or he's just, for one reason or another, it's not happening. He's not getting another son. And so when Henry dies, it's without any heirs, without any male heirs, which is going to throw England into another period of complete chaos. So looking back on it, the people who lived, after Henry died, they would have looked back on Henry and thought, wow, that's good. Thank you, Harry, for emailing the work. I'll see if I can find a way of incorporating it into the next one. Thank you. So his son, when his sons die, he's never quite the same again, and England is going to be thrown into chaos because no one's going to be able to quite decide who's going to be in charge. We'll look at the next king next time, King Stephen, who has some flaws himself. There's a bit of drama, though, between Stephen and one of Henry I's daughters called Matilda. A lot of people think his daughter should take over, but it's hard to express just how sexist this period of history is. So, most people are not going to accept a queen at this period in history. So Matilda, although she would be queen now if the same events happened, she's not. Yes, that's right. And but Stephen is the cousin of Matilda. So Henry's nephew, the oldest male relative. Well done, Laura. Next time we're going to go into a period called the Anarchy, where we're going to see, pure chaos between people who want Matilda to be queen and people who want Stephen to be king. But before we get there, since we've got a few minutes left, let's just recap our Norman kings so far. So if you do have access to the worksheet, if you can find that on the Google Drive, so far you could do 4 versions of that sheet. Our first king that we looked at, Harold Godwinson, only ruled from January to October 1066 when he died. And what happens, he is a popular English king. He's our last king to speak English for a while, although to be fair, he could speak French too, as far as we know. He was very rich, he was very powerful, but ultimately he failed at the Battle of Hastings, was killed, his armies were routed, and power went to William I. Now, William I, one of our most important kings in history, not necessarily the nicest for sure, but important, because he's someone who completely changed the whole history of England. He turns it from essentially an Anglo-Saxon English country into a Norman country, a Norman French country. When did he die? So Harold died in 1066. William dies in 1087. That's when he has the exploding fall down on my pommel and bloat up and pop death, which is a comedy death unless you were actually there and had to smell it, I guess. I'm in the forest because that's where William II died. So William II is the guy who takes over next, doesn't get on with the church, is a bit, makes the country pay for that bad relationship because they all get excommunicated, ends up, though, getting killed by his best friend, possibly boyfriend, in the forest behind me here, maybe. And he ends up, dying in that grisly way. Now, possibly, we cannot be certain here. Oh, what year was the Doomsday Book created? Now, Eleanor, that's a good question. The Doomsday Book wasn't completed until after William's death. I think it was about, I'll see if I can find out for you. It certainly wasn't finished until William was dead. It was started before he died. It took a long time to create the Doomsday Book because there were only, I believe, 7 monks sent around the country to count literally everything in the country. They didn't count the very furthest north, because that was agreed that the bishop up there could look after the north. And they didn't count London, because London was just too big and it was directly next to the king anyway, so they didn't bother counting that. But they counted literally every other house, town, village, person, peasant, cow, pig, bit of forest in the country. So it took years to build the Doomsday Book. There are copies of the Doomsday Book still around. I think there are some originals. In fact, we call it the Doomsday Book. It's really one big book and one smaller book, so it's the Doomsday Books, really. But yeah, they're still around in museums, and you can find copies of them on the internet. So if you do live in the UK, or you know of UK places, you can look up your village, your town, your home in the Doomsday Book, and assuming it was old enough, assuming it, your place was around in 1066 or thereabouts, then you will be on there. You'll be able to see your village, and you'll be able to see just how big it was 2,000 years ago. Yeah, so it's an amazing resource, and it is all online. So if you type in the name of your village or town and then Doomsday Book after it, you should be able to find out where that goes. Yeah, Eleanor, that's good. So Eleanor says the Doomsday Book was where her village was first mentioned, and that's right. For most places in England, unless it's like something huge like Winchester or London, most places in England we only have records of from that Doomsday Book. Yeah. Thank you very much, John. It was completed in 1086. There you go. So just before William II died. No, sorry. Hang on. 1086. I thought it was done after his death. Maybe maybe he didn't get to read it. I mean, he wouldn't have read it anyway because he couldn't read. Good old William. Unlucky. And so our final king today was Henry I, a king known for being fair and law and order abiding, creating a better legal system in England, but possibly killed both of his brothers indirectly and died after eating lamprey pie. Was he poisoned? Was he not? Probably not. I don't know. We'll see. All right. So next week, guys, we will have a look at King Stephen, and we'll have a look at Matilda, and we'll have a look at Henry II as well. Should be a good one. Tomorrow in geography, Brazil. Oh, yeah. So we'll have fun with that as well. What's happening on Wednesday? Wednesday, we're going to Athens, ancient Athens. And then on Friday, we're going to have the myth of Theseus, which is going to be a good one. It's got a Minotaur in it, which is always good. All right. Yeah, Kai, the Doomsday Book is still there. Yeah, the Doomsday Book is in a museum somewhere. All right, thanks, guys. Wonderful to see you all again. The recording will be up later. Have a good day.